If there's anything that Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington's shown me, it's that before you advocate for your right to be able to do something, first you should try to become worthy of the responsibilities that come with every single right. Hi, welcome to Rumble Book Club. I'm your host, Michael Hernandez, and let's get started. Today we're going to take a look at a book written by American legend Booker T. Washington. It's his autobiography written about his time as a slave, his time during the Reconstruction, and his fight for an education. He's not exactly sure all the specific details surrounding his birth, but Washington does know that he was born sometime in the spring of the year 1856, and he spent a majority of his childhood as a plantation slave right up until the end of the Civil War and the subsequent Emancipation Proclamation. Now, according to Washington, this put black people in a very precarious position. On one hand, black people now had their freedom. On the other hand, they were woefully unprepared for that freedom because they were deliberately kept from being educated, and they were also being deliberately kept from having useful skills outside of their niche job duty as a slave. As a young man, Washington was working in a coal mine trying to earn money to support himself and his family when he overheard a conversation between two former slaves, two coal mine workers that were talking about a school called the Hampton School in Virginia, which was about 400 miles away. This school was said to be giving young black men not just useful knowledge, such as reading, writing, arithmetic, but also giving them practical knowledge and practical job skills that they can use in the marketplace to enrich themselves. This sounded like a huge opportunity for Washington, and at that point, he formulated two goals in his mind. The first goal: get an education from this school, become smart, become wise, and become practically skilled to be able to be of service to his community. Second, I believe, is even more admirable: the fact that he didn't just think of enriching himself. He thought of his community. He wanted, after this education was complete, he wanted to go back, take every other young black man that was in the similar state of being uneducated and unskilled and stuck in brutal labor, and bring them up to a state of high education and high competency. That way, the entire black race could finally experience fully what it was like to be free and liberated people. A message that comes up over and over again in this autobiography of Booker T. Washington is just how tenacious he was, how much raw power he had in his mind to push forward under any and all costs. Getting an education from the Hampton School meant that he had to first get the funds just to start the journey, which he got at the hands of this old white lady who needed work done around her house. Now, she was known for being an extremely hard taskmaster over anyone that was doing work on her home. She didn't pay very much, and she was extremely high demanding, and most people quit in that first week. Booker T. Washington was not mentally weak enough to do that. He saw his goal as getting an education, and he stuck with it, and he not only worked all the way up to her expectation of how she wanted her house cleaned and kept up and taken care of, but he even describes that she eventually became one of his closest friends, and she taught him valuable lessons about caring for his surroundings and having the work ethic of doing a job right the first time. Upon getting just enough money from this old lady, and then also getting little bits of nickels, pennies, and dimes from his community who were all supporting him in his journey to get this education, he still had to cross 400 miles across this terrain, across this mountainous terrain, and it wasn't railway. A lot of this he had to do on foot and begging rides, carriage rides, just to get there. About 80 miles away from the Hampton School, he ran out of money completely and had to work in a shipyard, slinging pig iron and sleeping literally under a wooden bridge in the mud and in the cold, just to save up enough money to eat and then to eventually complete that 80-mile trek to get to the Hampton School. And once he was there, his problems weren't over. He arrives at this prestigious university, a place that he calls the most vast and beautiful place I had ever laid eyes on. He arrives here where all these very sharp-dressed young men are walking in, getting accepted into this university, getting their room and board, and getting the stuff they need. He walks in, not a nickel to his name, hardly any clothes. What clothes he does have are ratty, they're covered in mud, they're filthy, he hasn't shaved, and he smells awful. And he stands there waiting to be acknowledged by the admissions staff, who completely ignores him for days until finally they look at him, look at an empty room that's dusty and old, and say, "Clean that room." He doesn't even question it. He doesn't even ask why. He gets a broom, gets to work, and not only does he clean it to their expectations, He sweeps the entire room, moving furniture around and everything. Sweeps the room 4 times over, gets a cloth, wipes down every surface of the room until the admission staff walks in with a white rag, runs it across the surfaces, and doesn't find a speck of dust. And at that point, they let him into the school. Once he finally became a student, it still wasn't over. He was battling poverty for his entire time there. He had to work as a janitorial staff, working pretty much around the clock with barely any hours of sleep because he was trying to study as a full-time student, get these practical job skills, and then on top of that, work like an absolute dog in order to pay for this tuition until finally they relented and gave him tuition money. That way he wouldn't have to necessarily work all hours of the night just to pay for his education. Once he finally became an educated man, he helped found the Tuskegee School, which still exists today. Now, a lot of those old buildings are still not just in good condition, but they look tremendous. Now, that's because one of the things that Booker T. Washington insisted about his Tuskegee School was that it had the same format as the Hampton School, and that was they weren't just given a classical education, reading, writing, arithmetic, history, all the above, but they were also given, these young men were given practical skills that they can use, and one of those was brick making and brick laying. A lot of those first buildings at the Tuskegee Institute were actually built by those first classes of young men that were getting an education directly from Booker T. Washington himself. In addition to all these busy endeavors, Booker T. Washington never took his eye off the fact that black people still needed their civil liberties, civil rights. And so while he was doing all these things to lift up the black race, he was also under the table paying for a lot of these civil rights foundations, helping them to organize, and then also going around the country giving speeches and trying to bring white America to a place where it didn't just see the black race as a group of people that they were reluctantly giving rights to, but saw them as true equals in their eyes. One last note about this book is just how small and how tight-packed this book is. So Booker T. Washington had an unbelievably incredible life, and yet he condenses it into 150 pages, something you can read in an afternoon. And when you compare that to, for instance, like a huge 3-volume set by Barack Obama about his life, it shows you that it doesn't matter how remarkable or unremarkable of a life you have. If you speak succinctly and you use concise language, you can tell an amazing story in a very short period of time. I highly recommend this book. I got this book on Amazon. You can find it there too. The book is Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. Go out and get yourself a copy. Thanks for watching, everybody, and go read something.